بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. So now we're continuing with the sources of tafsir. Okay, and now we discuss the Quran as a source of tafsir for another Quranic verse. And now we're discussing where the Sunnah, meaning the Prophet ﷺ's statements, his saying, his taqreers, approvals, can become a source of tafsir. Okay, so if we have a recap, the first masdar was here. So in the first, as the first fasl, then a long time ago, let's leave that one side. Then masadir al-tafsir, the sources of tafsir. And we said the Quran is a source of tafsir. Tafsir al-Quran, with Quran means what? One verse explains another verse. Different levels. The Quran itself, the hay'ah, the structure, explains that this verse is referring to this verse. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْقَارِعَةُ. Okay. Then we have, what is the purpose of this tafsir al-Quran with Quran? It does maybe bayan of a mujmal, explains the word. It does takhsis. Yes. And within these three discussions, 1, 2, and 3 discussions last time. We're going to have similar discussions here regarding tafsir al-Qur'ani bi sunnah, where we use a sunnah to explain what is the intended meaning of a verse. So what does it mean by tafsir al-Qur'ani bi sunnah? What does it mean we use the sunnah to do tafsir of the Qur'an? So we say here's a few things. One is, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he explains the meaning of a verse. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam explains what a verse means. Either qawlan, either with his what? His speech. Either with his actions. His action actually tells us what this verse, the meaning of this verse is. Or he doesn't, or iqraran, or so he himself explains the meaning, or he approves of the meaning explained or applied by a companion. So either the Prophet ﷺ, he himself explains the verse, either qawlan or fa'lan, or a companion explains the verse, or a companion does the tafsir of the verse, and the Prophet ﷺ then approves of this tafsir. Okay? Let's take the first example. Okay? Yes? You follow? You follow? That's what it means. And you'll get more details as you go along in the examples. Now again, the maratib. The same way we say, well, how do we know that this hadith is a tafsir of the Quran? So either the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself, you can tell from the hadith itself is talking about the verse. Do you understand? The hadith itself discusses the verse. So if the sunnah itself tells us the sunnah is talking about the Quran, the hadith itself is in the siyaq, the context of a verse. So the hadith itself clearly, without any doubt, is telling us that this is what the verse means. Or, yes? And this can either be in a few ways. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself is in a minbar, he gives a bayan, he gives a lecture. He explains the verse without any question. Or he gives an answer. Someone asks a question, the Prophet explains it. Or the Prophet does an action, or he does an iqrar. So this is where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he directly, without any ambiguity, we know that this hadith is explaining a Quranic verse. Or it is ijtihad. Somebody has tried to apply a hadith that, look, this hadith is referring to this verse. Are you following? Okay, for example, look, this is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he himself initially, without anybody asking him or prompting him, he explained the meaning of a verse. It is narrated in Muslim that Uqba ibn Amir radiyallahu anhu, he said that the Prophet ﷺ was on the minbar and he said, وَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ. And the enemies, the disbelievers, they try to oppress you, they try to invade Medina, they try to kill you. So you need to make correct protections, and this is how every country protects themselves, they have a defense. So you also need to create strength. You have to make sure that you are strong enough. Yes, and prepare, make your preparations basically for any attack that may happen against you. وَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ. So ma is ambiguous, means a bayaniya. So prepare whatever strength you can against them. So the Prophet ﷺ, now, if you look at it here, مَسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ. So quwwah is strength, but it's kind of ambiguous. So the Prophet ﷺ says, look, ala harfu tanbih. Listen carefully. The quwwah is rami. The quwwah Allah is referring to is rami, means archery. Innal quwwata ar-rami. And he said it 3 times. Ala innal quwwata ar-rami. Ala innal quwwata ar-rami. So now what he's saying here, that the quwwah, strength, is actually what? Archery. Strength is archery. Strength is archery. So he's encouraging them to be archery. So in this hadith, clearly he read the verse, then thereafter he explained the word quwwah. He said the quwwah referred to in the Quran is ar-rami. Do you understand? We'll come back to this verse again at the tafsir aspect. What does it mean by, is it only rami, etc. But what we're saying here is that that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself clearly, we know that that this hadith refers to the tafsir of this verse. And nobody asked him any question, he himself initiated and explained the verse. Understood? There's no question here, he just initiated it and gave the tafsir.
So the next day, so it was still fresh in the people's mind, this ayat was revealed?
Not necessarily it was revealed then, it was maybe revealed earlier. But the Prophet, he just thought tafsir is important now. Maybe it was before a battle, or maybe before a threat from the disbelievers, and then he recited the verse and explained the verse again.
Oh, that's what that's
Yeah.
He recited the verse and everything.
Yeah, yes. But nobody asked him to explain the meaning of this verse. Another example is somebody is not clear. Somebody asks a question. So for example, we have here that, again, Imam Muslim rahmatullah alayhi narrates from Masruq, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we asked Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, regarding this verse. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Do not think of those people who are martyred in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be what? Dead. Rather they are what? Rather they are alive. So عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. They are by their Lord, they are being provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does it mean? عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. How are they being provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How are they being given sustenance by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What does this mean? So the companion Tabi asked Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, we also asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding this. So we asked the Prophet gave an answer. Now, is there any ambiguity? If you ask the Prophet, what does the verse mean? He tells us that the verse means this. So he's telling us, we know clearly that this hadith applies to this verse. And this is a reply to a question. So the Prophet explained, he says, أَرْوَاحُهُمْ فِي جَوْفِ طَيْرٍ خُضْرٍ. That the spirit and the soul of the shuhada will be placed in the bodies of green birds, and then they will, you have nest hanging down, like you have those hanging bird nests, or people things like that. So they will have qanadil mu'allaqatun bil arsh, hanging on the arsh. Again, what does it mean by birds? Birds is the easiest way to explain it, but Allah knows best what it means. Tasrahu min al-jannah haythu sha'at thumma da'wi ila tilka al-qanadil, etc. Then he explains the hadith. So we're not focusing on tafsir here, we're just focusing here. They ask a question, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, he explained what is meant. Okay? So again, it's the qawl. The Prophet himself is explaining what the verse means, and it's very clear from the context that it's the tafsir of the verse. Okay? A third example is that Prophet ﷺ, he uses his actions to explain a verse. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. So this is kind of in this category. The Prophet said, what does the Quran say? وَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. So establish, what does salah mean? So the Prophet said, look, you need to all the Prophet's actions where he performs salah, that's a bayan fa'li, tafsir fa'li. The Prophet's actions were a fa'il. The Prophet's actions were tafsir of the Quranic verse. What does it mean by aqimu salah? Warka'u marraki. What does ruku mean? I'm bowing. Is that counted? Would that be counted as a ruku? Or is it particularly doing ruku? What does sajda mean? Yes? What does qiyam mean? Standing up. How do you stand? What do you mean aqimu? What does it mean? Qumu lillahi qaniti. What does qiyam mean? So the Prophet explained this fa'lan. Similarly, Prophet ﷺ said in hadith, لِتَأْخُذُوا مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. Learn from me the arkan of Hajj, the rukna and the way of performing Hajj. Because possibly next year I will not be able to perform Hajj after this again. I may not be able to do Hajj again after this. So you need to learn to perform Hajj from me right now. So again, the Prophet's way of performing Hajj was what? Tafsir fa'li, a practical tafsir of وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ. So the Prophet is explaining physically what the verse Hijjul Bayt means. So Hijjul Bayt means these things. Yes? Have you understood? So again, the Prophet is doing tafsir of a verse, he's explaining the meaning of a verse using his actions. Okay? Following so far? Any questions regarding this? Or the Prophet ﷺ, he approves of a companion doing tafsir of a verse. So for example, there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ sent Amr al-As radiyallahu ta'ala anhu as a leader in an expedition. So Amr al-As radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he says that I went to sleep and I had a wet dream. And it's a very, very cold night. It was very, very cold. So I thought if I take a bath early in this morning, very, very cold, windy, I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get very, very sick and I could possibly die. I'll go through very severe bodily harm. So I didn't tayammum. I didn't have a bath. I didn't tayammum. Clay and I didn't tayammum. Then I performed salah and I led. He was a leader of the army, so he was the imam. Now obviously this news probably spread. So when they came back to Medina Munawwara, Amr al-As radiyallahu ta'ala said, I mentioned Prophet this is what I done. So the Prophet said, Ya Amr, you performed salah, you were the imam and you were junub, you never done wudu. So he said, Ya Rasulullah, I had a wet dream, but I was feared that if I have a bath, I will, go under severe bodily harm. So I did tayammum. And I remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا. Allah said, do not kill yourselves. Indeed, Allah is very kind and merciful to you, compassionate to you. So when I saw this, so this verse, I thought of this verse and I thought, well, I know what this means. What? That I should not do anything which will put myself in severe bodily harm. So he did tafsir of this, that what? لَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ also applies to doing ghusl in a very inappropriate place. So he did tafsir, Prophet then what? Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he just laughed, he smiled, and he never said anything. So he approved of it. Do you understand? So the Prophet's approval here is a tafsir of the verse. So Sahabi, he understood the verse in a particular way, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam approved of his understanding. So in all of these, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is clearly either qawlan, fa'lan, or iqraran. His staying, his action, or his approval, it shows a meaning of the Quran verse. We continue to Salah, inshallah. So to summarize, before we conclude, is that now we're discussing here Tafseerul Sunnah bi Sunnah. Tafseerul Qur'ani bi Sunnah. We're using the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to explain the meaning of a verse. And this means the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what does he do? Either using his actions, his sayings, or his approval of a companion, he does what? He explains the meaning of a verse. That's what it means, tafsir as a ta'rif. And the maratib is either that it is clear within the sunnah that the verse is mentioned in the siyaq. We know this story, whether it's the Prophet saying, his statement, his action, or his approval is talking about this verse. Or it can be ijtihad, which we do tomorrow, where somebody uses a hadith, it's not linked, the verse not mentioned in the context, but you apply it to this verse. Okay? Any questions regarding this? Everybody understood? Yes? So we stop here today, inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.